Hey y'all, welcome to another video. Appreciate you clicking on the video. You need to listen to this whole video because it's just packed with good stories. Hey, I wanted to tell you, last night I took my bride to a movie. We like to go to the movie and get some popcorn and hold hands like we were in high school. It's just fun. Anyway, we went to this movie. In the previews before the movie, we saw there's a movie coming out. It's directed by Guillermo del Toro. He's a really good director. He's directed all kind of really good popular movies. The name of the movie is Antlers, and the subject of the movie is the Wendigo. Oh, and I cannot wait till that movie comes out because I don't know much about the Wendigo, but it's a horror movie. If Del Toro directed it, I recommend it. He just does good movies. But I thought I'd tell y'all about that. Either way, let's jump into some Bigfoot stories, and we got one little at the end of one of these is a little bit of a UFO encounter. Hope you guys enjoy it. All right, here we go. This first story is really good. It's one of the it's not lost emails, but misplaced emails. It goes back to April of 2019, I think. I'm getting through those. The woman who wrote this email, this is not necessarily about Bigfoot, but Bigfoot comes into it. But I just love the story. I thought it was great. And so here's what she writes. My story is not exciting, but it is thought-provoking. Please just use my initials, JC. No problem, JC. I grew up on a farm in central North Carolina. I spent a lot of time in the woods with my brother, several cousins, and various friends that would visit the farm on a regular basis. Our adventures on the farm spanned mostly the 1970s and into the early 1980s. The farm has been in our family since the late 1800s. The children spent our time in the woods making forts, exploring, and just using our imaginations to create one adventure after another. We never had a Bigfoot sighting, but I can say personally I always felt I was being watched. Maybe it was an active imagination or the fact that I became interested in the Bigfoot legend after watching several movies on the subject, but I have always been a believer. In 2011, the show Finding Bigfoot premiered, and I could not get enough of that kind of show. It was about then that I found out the BFRO had a database online where one could see if sightings had been reported in various states and counties. Of course, I jumped at the chance to see if my county had any sightings. Lo and behold, there was one sighting for my county, and the hair on my neck stood up as I read the account. A Bigfoot was sighted in 2002 about a mile from the farm where I grew up in Johnston County. Having digested a lot of facts and knowledge about Bigfoot habitats while watching shows like Finding Bigfoot and learning that there were confirmed sightings in my area, my mind began to race. So many memories were running through my head, and things and events began to surface. The forest we played in as children had many signs of being Bigfoot habitat, but we were too ignorant to know it. The tree structures were very evident in my mind's eye as I recall the way the old logging trails appeared, and I mean many different kinds of structures like road/trail signage and nighttime structures. And then something weird surfaced in my memories. When I was about 11 years old, we had an old-fashioned family reunion where many of our extended family and friends came to the farm for a pig picking. That's where you cook a pig and pull it and everybody has a feast. You feast on a pig, for y'all that don't know what a pig picking is. Sometimes they cook it in the ground. You dig a pit and build a fire down in the pit and then just put the pig on top of it and let it cook all day and all night. Anyway, JC writes, I inadvertently dropped by my grandmother's house just prior to the gathering, and I found my mom and my aunt dressing my grandmother up in the kitchen. Grandmother was wearing an old man's breeches and a man's shirt, which was way oversized for her little frame. She had an old gray wig. My aunt was rubbing soot from the old wood stove on her face, and my mom was gluing hair trimmed off the old wig onto grandmother's face, which gave her an unkempt beard. I thought they had lost their minds. They told me that they would tell me what was going on if I swore secrecy. Of course, I wanted to know what was going on and why it was so hush-hush. My grandmother was going to become the sack woman and sneak up at the pig picking and scare the children. At the time, I didn't think this situation was funny, but now that I'm an adult, I can see the humor in all this. After all, children are here for the entertainment of their parents. Oh, that's cute. Yes, they are, JC. It's fun to mess with our kids, isn't it? But I digress. Let's get back on track. It was explained to me that grandmother was not the first sack woman to visit a family gathering on the farm. It appears that Grandma Lily played the same role many times back in the 1930s and 40s. So I agreed not to tell what I knew. I was quite proud of myself for withholding that information for several hours. The plan was that grandmother would hide in the foot of Granddaddy's station wagon while he drove on the dirt path just past the old farmhouse where the shindig was taking place. He would drop grandmother off at the wood line, which was about a quarter mile from the old farmhouse. Then she would wait a while and walk the path towards the farmhouse with a burlap sack thrown over her shoulder. Grandmother was such a great actress. She had an oversized baby doll sticking out of the sack on her back, and she changed her gait by dragging one leg. As she approached the farmhouse where the family was gathered, I yelled, "Who is that?" and just stood back and I watched the mayhem. Kids were screaming and running to their mothers and fathers. There was crying. Some of the kids threw up. It was great. Of course, grandmother had to unmask in front of the kids so that they would calm down. It was certainly an event we spoke of frequently to this day. But what does this have to do with Bigfoot? The farm we lived on came through my grandfather's lineage, so I asked him why grandmother and Grandma Lily decided to put on this farce. Where did the idea come from? He cryptically said there actually was once a wild woman in the area that took children. At the time, I thought he was pulling my leg, but looking back on it, I'm not sure. I can't ask the old folks about the history surrounding this tale because they're all gone now. I can still see my grandfather's face when he mentioned the wild woman, and I believe he wanted to tell me more, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Just recently, I did some research on the family farm, and while doing my research, I ran across some blogs which discuss many of the larger farms in my county. And in one of those threaded posts, a writer asked, does anyone know anything about the booger or Bigfoot that lived near the Neuse Island Swamp? Neuse Island Swamp, Hannah's Creek, Sassarixa Swamp, and other swampy structures are near the location for the largest North Carolina Civil War battle near Bentonville Battlefield in Johnston County. This area alone has a lot of paranormal activity as a result of the tragic events of the war. However, it also has some notation as having had a booger residing here. Sadly, no one knew anything about what the writer was referring to. Again, all the old folks who knew anything about these stories are no longer with us. We as families no longer sit around handing down stories or knowledge while talking around the dinner table or just before going to bed. Oral storytelling was so important to our ancestors, but we have gotten away from it because our lives have become so busy. So much knowledge is dying along with our older generations. I'm so glad you were keeping these stories as a kind of library of oral tales, and I challenge others to write down what they know and share it. And that's the end of the email. And I read this a couple of times, and I was trying to put together the sack woman with Bigfoot. But I think what she's trying to tell us is there are all kind of legends that go back well into the 1800s, and a lot of them possibly are of Bigfoot, or these boogers as they called them, living in that area. And it's just interesting stuff. And regarding the sack woman, the sack woman prank, you guys got them kids crying and everything. That's awesome. And I'm sure some of them had night terrors after that, JC. And I'm laughing, and it is funny. It's just funny because I remember being a kid you know, I remember my mother coming in one Halloween, and I can remember back when those plastic vampire teeth, you could buy them at TGNY or, different places. And she came in, and my mother leaned down like she was going to kiss me on my cheek. And then when she got about a foot from my face, she bared those plastic teeth, and I about came out of the chair. So, parents scaring kids, I don't know. I guess it's a little bit of a pastime. But we all grow up and we're okay. But regarding the oral tradition of storytelling, you're right. I think it is dying out, but it's not. I don't think that that's necessarily because we don't like it or we need people to keep it alive. We are ahead in technology, and we're able to write these things down easily. And so a lot of this stuff is really recorded, in written form. And now a lot of it is being recorded in video form. So stories move on, and I don't know that I'm doing anything special is what I'm saying. I just love these stories. I love sharing them with you guys, and that's all I'm doing. All right, let's move along to another story. Thank you, JC. That's a great, great story. This story is from Tristam. Tristam from Oregon. He writes, I have a Bigfoot encounter that I haven't told anyone except one of my very closest friends. This encounter happened when I was around 15. I grew up in Bend, Oregon. I went on a camping trip with my dad and my 3 brothers to Mount Hood National Park. My family likes to drive up to the mountain and camp in the middle of nowhere. The first day that we got to our newly found campground, it was pouring rain, so we stayed in our tent most of the day and around the campground. But on the second day, it was beautiful, and we went for a hike. We were single file on the trail, and I was in the rear. Halfway through our hike, I stopped to use the bathroom. My father likes us all to carry a firearm with us when we're hiking for safety. I was carrying a 9mm Glock on my hip. I yelled ahead to the group that I was stopping. I would find out later that they never heard me. When I looked ahead, no one was there. Then I heard a branch snap behind me. I immediately figured it was my brothers playing a prank on me, so I called out to my brothers. But the only response I got was a weird, low, guttural growl. I looked in the direction the noise came from, and I saw a huge stump that was 5 or 6 feet tall. And then from behind this stump, a huge creature stood straight up. Its head was now 3 feet above the 5-foot-tall stump. It was covered in long, reddish-brown fur. For a minute, we stared at each other, but my legs were glued to the ground and I couldn't move. After what felt like an eternity, it just turned around and it walked off. When my dad and my brothers found me, I was lying on the ground. 2 years later, I still get shivers thinking about that encounter. The only thing I can think of is that I encountered a Bigfoot. Thank you for listening. It's been hard having no one to talk to about this. Tristan, man, I'm glad you sent that in. I'm glad you got it off your chest. I don't know, maybe 10,000 people are going to hear your story. And I think you'll find out as you read through the comments and listen to my videos, you're not alone. There's a lot of people that have these type of encounters. They're not violent. I'm curious, you had a 9mm on your hip. Did you ever draw it? Did you ever think about drawing it and taking a shot at this thing? Or was there ever fear of any aggressive behavior? Or, I don't know, just questions that run through my head when I read stories like this. You made sure to tell us you were carrying a Glock 9mm, but that was the last of it. I'm just wondering if you pulled it. I'd be curious to know. Either way, it's a great story, and I know these encounters are life-changing. Oh, man. I just can't imagine walking down the trail and seeing something like that. But anyways, great story, Tristan. Thanks for sending it, buddy. This one is a scary one. It's from James in Missouri, and here's what he says. I've never told anyone this story. I've always tried to forget it. Even now, as I type this email, I'm shaking. This took place in the year 2000. Growing up in southeast Missouri, I spent a lot of my time hunting, fishing, and camping. I love being outdoors. At this time, I'd recently gotten into bow hunting and had obtained permission to hunt some river bottom land that bordered a state park. This was the second half of bow season, a week or so after rifle season had ended. Most hunters had filled their tags and were just tired of hunting, so there wasn't a lot of competition. I got to my spot that morning early, which was good because I'd never stepped foot on this property, and I wanted to get to my buddy's tree stand without getting lost or having to rush and make too much noise. It was cold that morning and the leaves were frozen with zero wind. It was going to be hard to be quiet. I made it to the stand without a hitch and had about a half hour or 45 minutes until sunup. No sooner that I had gotten settled in, I realized how quiet it was, almost scary quiet. Within a few minutes, I heard something directly behind me and below me. I could hear the leaves crunching and the twigs breaking and realized it was coming my way. As it got closer, I realized this thing didn't sound like a deer. It sounded like a person. I considered it was another hunter climbing up to this spot and how pissed he was going to be to find out that I had the area covered. I heard a loud crash and this thing was a lot closer. I don't know how long my mind wandered off about the possibility of another hunter coming my way, but this thing was close and I realized that it was no deer or it was not a hunter. This thing was way bigger than a deer or a human. That's when I started to worry. Behind me, it was thicker and more brushy than in front of me. I could hear limbs being snapped at a height that was not far below my tree stand, and I was 20 feet off the ground. I was frozen at this point, and as it got directly under me, it stopped. My heart sank. I was hoping it would just keep going. I could hear it breathing, and I was terrified, frozen, trying not to move. Everything got real quiet, and I was waiting for it to realize that I was sitting right above it. I have never been more terrified than I was at that moment. I heard its hand on the tree knocking the bark off into the leaves like it was crumbling it up. And then I heard a loud snap, which caught me off guard and caused my feet to move, making a slight noise against the stand. This thing jumped out from under me off to the left. It sounded like a freight train. It only moved about 20 feet away from me, and I was standing up at this point ready to draw my bow, my only weapon. It was still dark and I wasn't sure exactly where it was. The last thing I wanted to do was take a shot at this thing and make it mad. It stayed out there at 20 feet, and I'm guessing it was staring at me through the dark. I could still hear it breathing, only it was quicker now, like it was startled or it was nervous. We stayed like that for what seemed like an eternity, was actually probably only a couple of minutes. And then from in front of me, down the opposite holler, came the lowest, deepest, highest scream I have ever heard. That's the only way I can describe it. The one that's beside me starts to growl. I guess that's what it was doing, but it was a really deep growl, and I could feel it in my chest. And then the one closest to me moved, scaring me even more. I could feel my heartbeat pounding all the way through my body. I knew that it was coming for me. Right in front of me, he answered the call, and I'll never forget the sound and the depth of it. And then it slowly walked off like it was keeping an eye on me, though. I could hear it walk down the hill to the bottom to where I guess it met up with the other one. It was quiet for a few seconds and the two headed straight back towards me. Oh man, I could hear them. There was no mistaking it. I tried to draw my bow, but I was too terrified. I remember thinking about climbing further up the tree like that was going to help. I played out the scenario in my head. I don't know how long my mind was wandering, but when I snapped back, whatever it was had already walked past me and was going back down the hill. I was too scared to move, and when it got daylight, I saw what made the first loud pop noise that made me jump. The metal foot peg screwed into the tree had been snapped in two. I stayed in that stand until 1 o'clock that afternoon. I was actually afraid I would run into these things on my way to the truck. I sat there for hours trying to sort it out and figure out a way to get out of there. Finally, I just climbed down and I walked out with no other problems. Well, that's my story. I've never been hunting again. I stay out of the woods. People wonder why I stopped hunting, and I tell them that I just got burned out. I knew my buddy would see the broken foot peg. He never asked me about it. Hey, look, I'm not a storyteller, but I hope you can make sense out of all this. James, I can make perfect sense out of all this. And it's just unbelievable that this, oh my God. So, some of these stories, I don't even know what to say. I mean, this thing walks right under you in the dark. Now that's scarier to me than if it's in the daylight and it's walking under you. You can hear it breathing. You felt threatened and you're scared to death. I guess I understand why you're not hunting anymore. But I really appreciate you taking the time to write this down and share it with all of us. It's a great story. Scared you to death. But man, I know everyone that heard it enjoyed it and appreciates you sharing that with us. Thanks, James. This story is from Ken, and it's real exciting to me. I think you'll find it exciting. And here's what he writes. I was born and raised in southeast Alabama. I live in a little town outside of Dothan called Cottonwood. Sasquatch has always fascinated me ever since I was a kid, from seeing the classic TV shows like Unsolved Mysteries or In Search Of, but I was never 100% convinced Sasquatch was real. I became a fan again like most people because of the show Finding Bigfoot a few years ago. It was February 16th, 2018. I worked an overnight shift and got off about 5:30 a.m., and I wasn't tired after a long shift. I took the usual back road home. The sun was barely rising. I was approaching an empty cotton field on my left, and in the far corner of that field, I could see a dark figure moving around. I rolled the window down and I slowed to a creep to get a better look. And there it was, a massive, black, bulky figure. I could make out that it was kneeling down with its right hand planted on the ground and the other scratching through the dirt like it was looking for food or something. Dirt was flying up behind the creature like it was frantically digging for something. It slowly and smoothly stood up, and then it made its way to the tree line in about 3 steps. It was coal black. It had no neck. Its long arms were swinging low. I never saw its face, only its left side and back as it walked away. All this happened in about 10 seconds after I slowed down. I instantly figured that I had seen a Bigfoot. I blinked my eyes and I shook my head, and by the time reality sunk in, I was probably driving 10 miles an hour. In my rearview mirror, I saw another truck riding my tail, so I sped up and I headed on home. It is hard to describe how shocked I was. I've only told 2 other people this, and I'm pretty sure they didn't believe a word I said. I've always wanted to report this encounter to the BFRO, but it all happened so fast and I have no evidence. But I'm 100% sure what I saw was a Sasquatch. Nothing else in our woods walks like that and has the size and bulk that this thing had. I guess it could have been the farmer who owned the property and was out at sunrise just to run his fingers through the dirt for some reason, but this thing was as big as Andre the Giant wearing an all-black, bulky one-piece suit with a hoodie. There's nothing else it could be. I regret not investigating it, but I don't know how to go about that without trespassing or knocking on the farmer's door and looking like a crazy person. But without a doubt, I knew I saw something big and bipedal at sunrise in someone's crop field. I saw a Bigfoot in South Alabama, and now I believe in these things 100%. Ken, if I saw that, I'd believe 100% too. I actually am about 99.9% there myself, and I haven't seen anything. But there's just too many stories like this to make me think that there's not something out there. So I'm going to assume that you count this as a good memory because you got to see it from a safe distance, and there's no doubt in your mind what it was. It's great the way you wrote this up, and it was really exciting to me to read it. I really appreciate you taking the time to send this to me. All right, buddy, thanks. This is a pair of stories from Christy, who lives in Middle/West Tennessee. She lives on the Tennessee River, which divides Middle and West Tennessee. But I kind of see that as West Tennessee. But anyway, here's what she writes. Christy says, you're welcome to use first names and locations for the first 2 stories I have for you. The first I wouldn't have known if not for your channel. I was telling my best friend of 35 years, Carrie, about how obsessed I've become with your channel. Oh, that is so weird to hear. I just can't believe people enjoy this stuff, especially for me. But anyway, I'm not being falsely modest. It really does just blow me away. But I'm so glad, Christy, that you like this. Anyway, she says, did I ever tell you that I saw one when we were 18? I got all excited and said, no, but do tell. And then in true dixiecryptid style, I said, here we go. That's right. It was the summer of 1994, right after our high school graduation. My best friend Carrie, a young man named Rick, and a young lady named Lisa were out riding back roads in Humphrey County, Tennessee, Waverly to be more specific. It was around 2 a.m. and they drove down Clinton Road to an old bridge we used to jump off into a deep creek. There's nothing out there but cow pastures and woods, but it was a favorite swimming hole for the local teens. They parked and they got out. Carrie had to talk Rick out of jumping in the water from the bridge since it was dangerous to do at night. They were standing on the bridge throwing rocks in the creek below and goofing off when they saw what looked like a black cow at the edge of the creek. So in true silly teenage style, they started mooing at the large black mass until it stood up on 2 legs and looked straight at them. Carrie said she couldn't make out facial details, nor did she want to. She said it was huge, at least 10 foot tall, and it scared the crap out of them. Without a word, they made a dash for the car. As they were loading up, she said it made a low, deep grunting noise. I should have known something happened when Carrie refused to swim there that summer, but she never said why. She says she never went back because it scared her so bad, not even to drive down that road as a shortcut, and I don't blame her. The second story is my own. It was around 1988. Carrie and I stayed together every non-school night at either her house or mine. For some reason, and I don't recall, we were supposed to stay apart this Friday night. I'd probably gotten in trouble for not doing chores. Anyway, after a couple of hours of begging my mother, she finally caved in and said that we could go pick Carrie up for the weekend. We live in Camden, Tennessee, just across the river from Waverly. Carrie lived across town from me, but Camden is a small town, so it was only a 10-minute drive. My mom had a fully restored 66 Mustang that I would inherit as my first car when I turned 16. Mom was driving, and after picking Carrie up, we were in back. As she drove down Highway 70, or Brewston Highway as some call it, what seemed like a huge 18-wheeler was coming from the opposite direction. It seemed to take up both sides of the road and then some. All we really could see were these extremely bright lights. We all braced for a head-on collision as my mom cried, "Get over," to the other driver, and Carrie and I just screamed. All of a sudden, it was gone. Nothing in the road but our car. My mom pulled to the side of the road to compose herself. Carrie and I looked behind us, nothing but darkness on the road. Then we looked up in the sky, and there it was, a big red light up above the tree line. It just hovered there for a minute, and then it jumped space. It had moved way up into the blink of an eye, up to the altitude of small planes. It hovered there for a moment, and then just like before, it blinked across to the other side of the sky, and then it just disappeared. When we got home, my dad grumbled about what took us so long. Mom said we hadn't been gone long. Dad replied that we were gone for over an hour. Even with the time we were pulled over, we shouldn't have been gone any more than 30 minutes. Carrie and I still try to come up with what that could have been if not a UFO, and we haven't come up with an answer in 30 years of looking. I hope that you can use these stories. Thank you for listening and all the great stories you put together for us. Have a blessed day, Christy. Christy, of course we can use these stories. We love them all. We love them all. And you use punctuation. That got you in the top 10% right there. And I really appreciate you writing this. The story specifically about the Bigfoot standing up at the bottom of the creek You know, they thought it was a cow. I don't know. I can just see these things unfolding in my mind as I read this stuff. Oh, man, just to see that thing stand up and turn around and look at them. Oh, good grief. What a shock. And then these lights coming straight at you guys when you were younger on the highway. You know it's going to be a head-on collision. You just, what can you do? And then, poof, it's gone. Man, that is so crazy. I absolutely think it was a UFO. You know, unidentified flying object. Could it have been a spaceship? I don't know. Probably. But either way, these are just awesome stories, Christy, and I really appreciate you sending them. Okay, I think that's going to wrap it up for this video. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.